Dominos tipping their customers, Double Dash data innovation, and why is Google not spoken of more when it comes to restaurant ordering? That's all ahead on this week's Monday Minute. Monday Minute works like this. We're going to ask each other 5 questions about 5 headlines from the last week. Are you ready? Let's go. Okay, Meredith, first question is for you this week. Sterling Douglas from Chowley put out a very interesting blog article about why is no one talking about Google when it comes to online ordering. What are your thoughts?
Well, I love this article, and I think first it's worth just reiterating some of the points that Douglas makes in the article. He talks about Google being the 4th largest source of orders on their platform after the 3 major third-party delivery companies, and also how the Google orders are more profitable for restaurants because they're charging a lower fee. So between volume and low fees, as he says, it seems like a no-brainer that all restaurants should activate Google ordering for their restaurant. And it makes sense, right? If someone is looking on Google, most likely they're typing in the name of your restaurant into the search engine. And as a result, they're looking directly for you. So much like the third-party platforms have introduced tier pricing, where if a customer is looking exactly for you, you pay less. It makes sense that Google would charge less here. So I think maybe the key question is why? Right? So if Google has all the traffic, they have people searching, and they have the ability to take people all the way through from I have an idea about food to I've ordered it. Why aren't they charging more for that, right? And I think that all of us have a little bit of natural concern that maybe like, oh, are they charging less now just to get me hooked on it, and they're going to jack up the prices? And honestly, I don't think so, because what's in it for Google is 2 things. Number one, they can set up Google Pay on the back end with a whole bunch of restaurants, which is another channel through which they make money. And number 2, and probably more importantly, they keep people on the Google search engine. One of the biggest risks for Google is when there becomes a specialized search engine that takes traffic off of their site. And in many ways, Amazon is the worst case of this for Google, right? People go off Google onto Amazon and use Amazon to search for products that they want to buy. Travel is another example of this, where people go off Google and they use something like a kayak. And I think in food, where there's so many searches for restaurants, restaurant locations, Google's trying to keep that traffic on the Google platform and not repeat the mistakes that have been made in other verticals. So what's in it for them, I think, is keeping the guest in the Google ecosystem. And I love that as a result, restaurants benefit, and everyone should look at using this. All right, Carl. So Q, which is, they call themselves Beyond POS, so they're sort of a POS company, released a State of Digital for 2022 restaurant survey report this week. What highlights were in it that you were finding interesting?
Yeah, there were a few. Let me bring up this here so we can share the ones that I wanted to touch on today. The first one I thought, which was particularly interesting, was 64% of the 59 brands that they interviewed are still using legacy POS. So 36% are using a cloud POS system, which is fascinating to me, because when we talk about technology adoption, I think a large angle on this is actually around the way in which POSs are still actually the ball and chain around many restaurants' kind of necks, if you will. You think about a cloud system.
It's a good way to put it. Some people would call it the heartbeat of the restaurant, but I think ball and chain is a little more accurate.
Yeah, well, and this is one of the things I love about Q, actually. But the benefit of a cloud system, of course, is that it's easy to update. It allows you to be able to get better access to your data no matter which channels your business is coming through. So it's not so much just about the brick and mortar world. And therefore it also gives you that ability to scale in a much easier fashion too. So that really stood out to me as probably one of the key ones here. The other one, as you can see in the top right there, is just around native web versus third party. 40% of those brands were saying they get less than 10% of their orders from native online ordering channels, which just goes to show the level of opportunity that still exists out there for being able to move people away from the third parties. Right next to it, you'll see that piece about 20% of those also have more than 50% of their orders coming through third-party marketplaces. So that remains for me one of the key challenges. And then one that we've often talked about here on the Monday Minute, Restaurant 101, what is impacting the guest experience the most right now? Well, it's consistency, it's order accuracy, and it's about making sure you deliver on time. And so, again, it doesn't matter what piece of technology, which POS you're utilizing. Ultimately, you need to find the right bits of tech, but also the right operational processes within your kitchen, within your restaurant, to be able to satisfy the customers in much the same way as you can do in a brick and mortar setting. Okay, our third question this week, Meredith, is actually about an article that we found in Fortune, which is an interesting story on how DoorDash are leveraging data in a particularly innovative way. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I think part of this is just a classic PR placement piece talking about DoorDash and how great they are. But behind that, I want to celebrate that they are doing something that's pretty great. And it reminds me of a lot of when Tressie Lieberman in our book talks about Chipotle launching the lifestyle bowls and how they were able to see in the data on the back end behavior that some consumers were exhibiting, which was trying to create certain lifestyle bowls themselves. And they thought, how can we make this easier? How can we just tell them these are all the ingredients that you should choose from if you want something that's keto or Whole30? And in a very similar manner, DoorDash was looking at the data on their system and saw all kinds of consumers placing an order from a restaurant, and then right after that, placing an order from 7-Eleven to get things to go around that restaurant order that a restaurant maybe couldn't offer. And they took that data and used it to create their Double Dash product. And I think when restaurants talk about, oh, the data is so important, I need the consumer data, and they know that it's important, but they're not quite sure what they'd use it for. I think, personalization, remarketing, things like that get a lot of attention. But on the back end, all of this data also helps with thinking through how to make products that consumers are going to want. And those products might be, like they were in the case of the lifestyle bowls at Chipotle, an actual food product, but they might also be a way of shopping. And as we think about product in the new world of a digitized restaurant, part of the product really is that UI, UX, how a consumer engages, what they're able to choose from on that digital ordering platform. Okay. So, Carl, the virtual kitchen operator blog caught your eye. Tell me what piqued your interest.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to check out Sam O'Brien's blog here, because for me, it gives a very transparent, direct account of what it's like to be operating a virtual restaurant in today's world. And Sam here runs a restaurant called Smash Burger Sliders, and he's not a restaurateur by trade. He came from BCG actually originally, so he's really exploring and learning a lot of things. But he's putting those learnings into these writings that he's putting out every month right now. Let me bring this up so I can share with you some of the quotes that I thought would be worthwhile sharing with our audience. And let me go through this. The other thing we're seeing is that demand matching the labor needed across service hours is tricky. During slower hours, we need 2 people to run the show, but during peak hours, we absolutely need 4. The tricky part is that while we need 4, not all 4 are at 100% utilization. And he gives the breakdown, as you can see there, with the grill person at 90%, but the expert 50%, which I think is fascinating, first of all. But he also then says nobody's maxed out. They have to remain separate because combining them becomes infeasible, stuff gets missed, too much task switching, etc. But the key insight he's saying he realized is that cutting labor isn't the answer. Increasing top line to maximize utilization is the answer. Now, I love that, and I love it because he's actually saying, look, you don't need to change the mindset of how to really think about the operational side of it. You also need to think about the marketing side. And so I would argue with Sam here on one point, and that is, I do think there's opportunities for you to be able to find ways to be able to make better use of the resources. And rather than thinking about stations as individuals, break up the tasks themselves and then almost cut them out. We work with our team over at Service Physics that we love, and they break out the tasks and they cut them out and they basically put a little Tetris puzzle together to be able to say, actually, if you look at this, you can combine the time together and actually take a task that might take 4 people 5 minutes to do, actually a task that can now take 3 people to do in a minute less, for example. And obviously that is something that requires a bit of the Kaizen lean thinking to be able to do that. Now, before I move on from this, Meredith, I want to share this one as well. There's one particular trade-off, he says, that we're exploring, and that's trading labor for increased food cost. So, for example, instead of one person scooping a chub of beef into meatballs, instead buy pre-portioned beef at a higher cost. I'm okay with letting food costs go up at the trade-off of labor costs. And again, this for me is a very tactical kind of item, but makes sense, right? If you can actually offset some of the challenges you're facing from a labor perspective with this, then perhaps this is a way to be able to accommodate some of those challenges. And certainly food manufacturers out there are increasing their allocation of time and resource to making it easier for restaurants to be able to deal with some of these labor challenges.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think, the thing about our supply chain in America is that these big food suppliers have manufacturing plants and they have scale, and they, as a result, are able to put in robotics and automation and very low labor cost in order to convert the same raw material to a finished product. And when we get down to the scale of a restaurant, which is much, much smaller, making those automation trade-offs is a little bit harder, right? Because you're just not going to have the same throughput going across the line. And until the cost of robotics and automation start to come down, which they're starting to, but really get to a place where that trade-off makes sense, it's very hard in the actual restaurant to say, I'm going to spend on CapEx so that I can have less labor on the line. And by moving that activity back up the supply chain to someone who has more scale than you, you're able to kind of leverage that scale, take advantage of it, and bring the overall system cost between your big 2 prime costs down. Now, this is then linked back to what we talked about in the prior point, right? Because if the challenge is driving those sales to get to a point where you're taking advantage of or have scale to take advantage of, then we start to think about, exactly as you said, those stations, not just people, but equipment, right? If you've got a piece of equipment that is only 50% utilized, well, maybe it's time to design some products that use that equipment, right?
Okay, so our last question this week is one of my favorite stories, actually, that I've seen through the week. Domino's are tipping their customers, but they're tipping a certain type of customer, the pickup customer. Take us through what your thoughts are on this one, Meredith.
Yeah, so Domino's is giving essentially an incentive for customers to do what I affectionately call self-delivery, which is takeout or going through the drive-through, getting the food themselves, taking it to wherever they're going to consume it. And in the case of Domino's, with the labor challenges, they too are affected by them and have trouble getting enough drivers to fulfill all the demand that they're seeing. And so they are trying to encourage consumers to come get their own product and self-deliver. Now, when they do, they give them a credit toward their next purchase. What I love about this is that they call it tipping, because it helps frame in the consumer's mind, not only are you not tipping the driver, you yourself are getting tipped. And so it feels like twice as much, which is amazing marketing. And the second thing about it that I think is amazing is it takes something that's a problem for the restaurant, can't get enough labor, and turns it into an opportunity where they can tell the customer that they're getting more value.
Okay, well, that's it for this week's Monday Minute. Thanks as ever for watching. I would love to be able to get your views on what you thought of today's articles, the questions you have, the potential different answers that you would give, and anything you'd like us to cover in a future episode. But as ever, please follow us on our Learn.Delivery social channels. Keep watching, keep listening, subscribe if you haven't, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again next Monday. The Monday Minute is available for you to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Watch us on YouTube and follow us on all our social media Learn.Delivery channels. Thanks for listening.